Herc, Major League Soccer is a league that has always been looking to promote its rivalries. But you know what you need for a good rivalry? You need teams that are at least somewhat close to each other. So let's focus in on expansion and kind of where you think expansion has given us some of the best rivalries across the league.
No, this is easy, Seb. You go back to the inception of Major League Soccer. Nobody really cared about, and I should say exception happened a few years later. Nobody really cared about a Dallas versus Chicago. They tried to force that down your throat. It's a rivalry. It's a rivalry. Nobody cared about that. But then all of a sudden you get Dallas versus Houston. Hey, this makes a little sense. But then you throw into the mix an Austin. Now you have a tri-rivalry. This makes a little sense. You've got teams like the Galaxy who ran rampant in the earlier years of the league who didn't have a rival. And if it was San Jose. And all of a sudden that went away. But guess what? Chivas USA. That worked well for a little bit. But then you bring in LAFC. The same city, two clubs to spend just about the same amount of money that are getting the attention of the rest of the world. Because let's be honest, Zlatan comes to Los Angeles, so the rest of the world pays attention. Carlos Vela comes here. You've got, I don't even know how many Mexican fans in Mexico and in the United States paying attention. It just makes sense to make this regional, because that's what rivalries are around the world. It's how are we rivals? Proximity.
Speaking of regions, you talked about Texas, you talked about LA. Let's maybe focus in a little bit on the Southeast, right? Because I think that's where in recent years we've seen a lot of expansion. And of course, you think about college football, right? You think about the SEC. You've got some real great rivalries. You've got some real tension between southern states already. So if you can capitalize on that in MLS, the one thing I would say, Herc, is that none of those rivalries have really popped off yet. You could see a Nashville-Charlotte maybe becoming a rivalry. You could see a Miami or an Orlando, but it hasn't popped yet. What do you think of those new rivalries might come to the fore in maybe the short term?
Listen, an Orlando-Atlanta, even though it doesn't make too much sense, have already had their fair share of animosity. They're good moments. And Orlando-Miami, that makes sense. Nashville-Atlanta, we're going to have to wait and see. All this comes with time because history comes with time. You have to build up not only proximity, but games that actually matter. That's how you actually build an organic rivalry. Where can we play? How can we play? What's at stake, et cetera, et cetera. And I will add, and I go back to these force-fed rivalries. At one point, they were trying to make Toronto versus Columbus a thing.
The Trillium Cup.
The Trillium Cup. They were trying to make that a thing. There is nothing more of a rivalry for Toronto than Montreal. History, proximity, neighbors that don't like each other. That is a rivalry, not these force-fed ones.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of the best rivalry, and of course we're going to go to the Pacific Northwest, but that also has roots in expansion in terms of Major League Soccer. There is history pre-MLS there, right? But we know that since both teams have come into Major League Soccer, we get huge, massive games in the playoffs. And for me, that rivalry, it has as much to do with the history as some of the great playoff games that we've had, right?
Thank you, sir. Thank you. You finally said it. Listen, I keep saying Seattle versus Portland is the best rivalry in Major League Soccer, and when people ask why, the history. Not only do they have the history, this dates back to the 1970s, but they hate each other.
Portland and Seattle, right? The cities don't like each other.
Two cities that hate each other, separated by the I-5. They can't stand each other. It comes in all sports, in all walks of life, all aspects. They don't like each other, and yet they have two of the most successful franchises, I would say, in soccer. And they happen to be so close to each other. It just makes sense. You're going to see things like this. There's going to be a point where we hear about rivalries in Mexico, we hear about rivalries down south in Argentina, around the rest of the world. It's going to get to the point where they're just as old and just enriched in history.
LAFC and LA Galaxy is proof that maybe you don't actually need a lot of time to make a great rivalry. And if you want proof that a lot of time doesn't also mean great rivalry, look at all the teams in the Northeast, right, Herc? You got DC United, Philly, New York, New England. Those should be great rivalries, but they're not.
Who's DC's rival?
It used to be New York Red Bulls. Now?
It used to be New York Metro Stars.
Oh, New Jersey Metro Stars. That was Herc that said Metro Stars, not Sebi. I have no New York Red Bull violence here. I'm a very unbiased DC United fan.
That's when you thought like it was a thing. That's when you thought there was an actual rivalry.
Cup?
Exactly. Yep. I don't know who DC could consider a rival today because I would suggest or I would assume that New York or New Jersey itself would think that City is its rival now, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. You got the Hudson River Derby. So it's interesting, right? Major League Soccer started in the Northeast, but when we started this section talking about rivalries, we talked about Texas, LA, Pacific Northwest, Southeast. The last place we came to for MLS rivalries was the Northeast. Let's see if that changes in the coming years.
Well, thank you very much for watching ESPN on YouTube. For more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for live streaming, premium content, and let's not forget as well, ESPN FC 7 days a week. Subscribe to ESPN Plus.